Hello, this is Roger Capello, bringing you episode number 43 of My Week at the Club, my weekly exploits at the Wachusett Chess Club in Fitchburg, Mass. And each week I bring you my chess game, as you must know by now. And also, each week, I stick in a little astronomy tidbit at the start. The game today should be more fun than it was last week, but I don't know about the astronomy. I found it interesting. It's over there on the right-hand side here. You can see something that is a little hard to interpret, and what it is a result from a new paper that came out in the last week or two on a gravitational wave detection that happened in 2017, in August of 2017, on an object called GW170817. And there have been about a half a dozen gravitational wave detections so far, but this one was particularly interesting, especially with this new analysis that's been done. So just to give you a little background, you need a very energetic event to detect gravitational waves. So a lot of mass has to be moving very fast. And in this case, what it is it's the collision of two neutron stars that are each, one's about its solar mass and one is about 1.5 times the mass of the sun. And they're in orbit about each other, and very close orbit, and spinning very rapidly because they're so massive and so close. And what happens is, because they are basically distorting the shape of space, they're sending out energy in the form of gravity waves, and those gravity waves, the energy from them comes out of the orbit, and so they spiral together. They don't just keep orbiting the way they would if there were no gravity waves. And what you see here, over here on the right, is about 20 seconds or so, the last 20 seconds of life of this binary pair of neutron stars. You can see this curved line coming up. That's the frequency of the pair. That's a function of time. So if you look on the left here, you see the frequency 100 hertz, 300 hertz, 500 hertz. These things are spinning around so fast that if they were audible, you could hear them as a kind of increasing pitch. And as they get closer and closer together, over the space of just a few seconds, they go spiraling in and spiral around very fast, a death spiral. So this region here where the arrow is drawn is showing where they're coming together. And what's new about this this research that was done released this last week, was that this analysis used a more sophisticated technique for looking at the data, and was able to see that there's actually a signal after the collision here coming downward again, buried here in the noise. And what that is thought to represent is the object, the post-collision object, which is a hypermassive neutron star, slowly, or not slowly, but fairly rapidly spinning down, slowing down in speed. Now, originally it was thought that the two neutron stars came together and formed a black hole, which can happen if they're massive enough, but apparently these are just under the mass limit, such that they didn't form a black hole, but they actually formed just a larger single neutron star. And it's thought that it's slowing down very rapidly because it's actually a thing called a magnetar, which is a special kind of pulsar that has a very strong magnetic field. And with that magnetic field, it's attached to the blobs of stuff around in nearby space there that got thrown off during this spiraling in process. And it's slowing itself down by breaking on the material on the outside. Anyhow, kind of interesting. These are fascinating objects. This particular one is thought to be about 40 megaparsecs away. So, that's 130 million light years. It's nowhere near as far as the edge of the observable universe that I talked about last week, but it's still, it's not at all in our local neighborhood, so to speak. Andromeda is only 1 megaparsec instead of 40, so it's pretty far out there. Okay, I will move along and give you this interesting chess game because it's fun. I played it against Mike David, and I started out with E4. I don't know why the engine is going here. And the reason for that was, even though I've been playing D4 mostly lately, was I thought I would. I've played Mike before, and I thought that I'd get more of the type of game that I wanted to reach doing this. I had an idea that he would play the Scandinavian because he had been talking about it some lately with D5, and that's an interesting opening for black. White doesn't have much better than to trade off. There is a Black-Mardemer gamut you could go into in this position. With D4, pawn takes F3, and if pawn takes here, knight takes, which is an interesting game for white, but I didn't feel like playing a gambit. Anyhow, he took with I traded off the pawns. He took with the queen, and then I of course am able to attack that queen immediately. And normally the queen retreats to A4, but in this case, what he did is he went back to D8, and this is also quite playable move, because very often in the Scandinavian, the queen ends up making a maneuver, coming out to take the pawn, coming over to A5, and then after black threatens to win it, maybe with a discovered attack by a bishop, it ends up making a triangular movement back to D8 or C7. And so this is just going, admitting that that's where it's going to end up. The problem is that, right now, after white makes his move, white has two knights out, black doesn't have anything out. So white has gained one tempo in relation to where white normally would be at this part of in relation to where white is at the very beginning of the game. So white always gets to move one piece out before black does, but now we've got two pieces out before black does. And in return for that tempo, black has gotten the exchange of his D-pawn for white's E-pawn. And normally the E-pawn is this E-pawn that's on E4 is considered more valuable than the D-pawn that rests on that was traded for on a D5. So a little bit of theory behind the Scandinavian there. So he played knight F6. I developed my bishop. Little unusual move order. D4 is often played there, but this is fine. And this is tempting him to make a mistake, and he did. And so I feel a little bad for Mike because this game really got defined by this mistake. It's just like last week, that piece that I hung against Paul Godin. It was really, I had a tough time after that and really didn't have much of a chance in the game. And similarly, Mike has a tough time in this game as well. And so it's really, even though it's fun and there's some neat tactics from my point of view, it is really a question of, how do you go about winning a game in which you have maybe not a decisive advantage, but a decided advantage. And the problem is that I have two potentially good moves. One that I did not take was to play knight E5. And of course, if the bishop were to take the queen, which would be a horrible move, bishop takes pawn on F7 is pretty strong. Doesn't have to take my queen though, and what I thought he would do would be to play the bishop back to E6. If he did do that, I could just go ahead and capture it and double his E-pawns. And it turns out Stockfish likes this a little better than what I did. So back to the position. What I did, though, was to do a sham sacrifice on F7 with the bishop check. He really has nothing better than to take it. And then I played knight to E5 check. And this is a combination that comes up quite a bit in E-pawn openings. He went back to G8, probably his best square. But, of course, the beauty of this is that I have two attacks now on his bishop and can win it. So I take it. And him taking my knight and bringing my queen out is not a good idea. So he needs to do something else. But what he did, playing the knight to D7, his B knight to D7, causes problems because it keeps the queen from developing, and as you'll see, this bishop and pawn have trouble developing. The rook has trouble developing. So it's all about white's rapid development versus black's slow development, and also this structural weakness of this isolated e-pawn that black has, and also real weakness along this A2 to G8 diagonal, this light square diagonal. So what happened? Next move, I played D4. As I said, I wanted to get developed rapidly, so this is a quick way to get my dark squared bishop into the game, and also control some center squares. I figured that with the pawn on D4, now his knight is deprived of those two squares that it might naturally want to go to. I was toying around with the idea when I was playing the game of, in this position, of playing H3, because that way I would discourage him from trading knights, because I could take back with the pawn and open up my rook file, which would really add more fuel to the attack. But it turns out that that's in. Let me go back a second. That taking this. See, I should say that the thing I would try to avoid with the H3 was that if I played the D4 move, as I did do, I thought there was at least a chance that he might play knight takes knight in this position, and then after queen takes, attack the queen with the pawn, and if I play queen to E6 check, his king just runs off to H7, and I felt like this was giving his rook a way out. Well, it turns out, I didn't go quite far enough in this variation. The computer pointed out that knight E4 in this position is very strong, because it's threatening now coming into G5 with devastating check. And the only way to really stop a mate here is to block this rank with the knight. But the knight comes in check anyhow, and it turns out wherever the king goes, the queen is lost. Obviously, if it comes up, there's a simple fork, and if it comes to G6, it's also lost, because the queen can come into F7 check. The king only has one legal square, and now knight to E6 check, discovered check, with the bishop, is going to allow the knight to take the queen. So this would have been a bad idea for him to go ahead and play H5. And of course, I should point out, as I have in my notes here, that after queen G4, just simply attacking the queen would have been a horrible move, but he would not have made that move. That just simply allows mate in one. Okay, so where are we at here? Instead of, after my D4, instead of playing those lines I just showed you, he played C6. So this gives this queen a way to get out into the game, and it's a pretty characteristic move of the Scandinavian. It's almost always played. But the problem in this position is I think it's too slow. Even though it helps his pawn structure and helps him develop things, it's going to take him a while to enact his idea. And if I had responded correctly, it would have ended up in misplacing his queen, because I played queen E2. Again, with the idea here of threatening mate on E6. And a little trouble getting the scrolling to keeping on going here, but that's easily answered. He makes Luft with H3, and now on his very next move, where are we at here? Okay. He played queen to h5, and with the idea of bringing his queen in over to the king side to help out. And the correct response by white here would have been actually to play knight e5. And then after knight trade, because he doesn't want, knight takes knight, knight takes back, queen e6 mate, or things like that to happen. After the knight trade, pawn takes and his knight goes to d5. Now his queen is really kind of blocked out here over on the queen side, and white could continue on going, pressing on with this kingside attack. Play the knight in through e4, and typical moves, developing move with a pawn like that. The queen comes in and so on. It could get ugly very fast. Okay, I didn't do that. Instead, I played bishop to d2, which is, I gave myself a dubious mark on it. The idea, of course, is that there's a possibility of a discovered attack with the knight going somewhere, bishop attacking, X-ray attacking the queen when the knight moves, and my knight gets a free move, and often you can build a tactic out of that. But the thing is, he's a temporary visitor to e5, and his plan really all along was to go on a5, was to go to f5. Okay, on f5 now he's starting to, he's threatening to win my knight. This knight here is attacked twice on the knight on on g4 rather, and so I have to do something about that. And what I chose to do was to move it, retreat it, and attack his queen. And his queen has not a lot of good squares to go to, and it turns out that I can hassle the queen pretty much wherever it decides to go. But he decided to go to g6, and so that allows me to hassle him with my f-pawn, with f4. And now on the very next move, my pawn will be attacking his queen. So he has to do something about that. Otherwise, I just get a real bind after I play pawn to f5. So he played e6 in an attempt to prevent or at least discourage that, thinking he could trade off the weak pawn. But the problem is, I just go ahead and play f5 anyway. And after he exchanges, I take back with the knight. And now that knight is on f5, which is a really strong square. Knight f5 for white or f4 for black are both really superb attacking squares. Kasparov used to write had a lot of games in which he used that motif in attacking, and wrote several times about the power of the knight if you can establish it on f5 or f4 for black. And so that knight is there, it's lingering around, it's starting to threaten all sorts of issues, but it does allow him to play his rook over and attack my queen. But my queen simply steps out of the way, and I went to d3 for a couple of reasons. The other square you might consider would be to go to f3, but on d3 it's threatening to slide over on the third rank at some point and attack the king side. And there's also it also supports my knight if this rook down here wants to move away, if my f rook goes somewhere else. The knight is supported, and it also is threatening a little tactic, which, if you want to pause the video and see if you see what the tactic is. Pretend that black makes a nothing move over here. How does white play and win? Well, it's easy to see, I think. And of course, the answer to that would be a check, giving my knight away, but discovering this attack on his queen and winning it. But of course, Mike's too strong to fall into that trick. But it never hurts to set these traps, because you never know. Sometimes your opponent will oblige you and make the mistake. So instead, in this position, he played his queen to h5 with an attacking idea. I think what he was thinking about at this point, at least what I figured he was thinking about, was to play his knight to g4, threatening queen takes h2 mate. So at some point I have to answer that threat. And what I chose to do was to play rook to c3. It wasn't the first choice of Stockfish. Stockfish wanted me just to bring my knight back and attack his queen. But I think this is nevertheless is a strong move, and it's not much weaker than what Stockfish wanted. So what he did, okay, well, maybe I should speak about this position a little bit. There's not, the rook now is on the third rank, and what's happening is this A rook is threatening to come over to f1, doubling the rooks. Also, this rook is threatening to come either to g3 or to h3. If the knight were to come in here to g4, obligingly, I could just play rook over and chase the queen back to f7. So, I mean, it's a multi-purpose move, the rook f3 was. And his response to that, though, was not good. He played g6, and that gives me the possibility right away. And it was my first idea in this position was to play the knight back, attacking his queen, and now this pawn on g6 is attacked. His queen has to defend it, and he can't go to f6. So the only place he can go to defend it would be g4. And then I could attack it again with something like h3, and now I'd have to go back to e6, and then my queen could come in with check. Anyhow, it's not a pretty sight. Oops, g6, g3. So after he plays g6, that would have been a good move, but when I looked at it a little bit, I saw, hey, there's even a better move, and that's to just go ahead and make use of this light diagonal. And the reason I ignored that at first is because it seems like he can just block it. I mean, he's got a knight he can throw onto d5, but the problem is that I can just take that knight. And now we get to a position that is kind of funny, because it's got two knights, both on prise. This d5 knight is on prise, the f5 knight is on prise, and he can't take either one. It's both, deadly if he takes either one. So I don't know which one you want to take first. If he was to take the d5 knight, I would just take back, check, and well, he could give away the rook on d6 like a computer would, or more like a person. He could come to h7, and I could check him, and he'd interpose with the bishop, and there'd be a mate. All forced. So that's not such a hot idea. And taking the other knight here allows us double check, which is also very strong, and also forces mate. Knight to f6 check, and now the only legal square is g7. I can take his queen, which is good enough, but it also leads to mate. I mean, it doesn't stop there. It keeps being fun. He can either play his king to h7, in which case my queen comes in with check, similar to that last line, or he could come up with it, which is a little different idea. And I wouldn't want to give the queen away. Let's take that away. Let's see. Rook here is very strong. Check. Okay, and now either comes back and gets checkmated that way, or he comes up and takes the knight, in which case the queen comes in. And he comes down, and I take this pawn, and now there's going to be mate next move. So he's getting mated in that line. Sorry about all the variations I'm spewing out here. He came up with a way to temporarily delay things. He played rook e6. He thought about it for a long time. Of course, it's painful. It doesn't help. It looks like maybe I'm just winning the queen rather, with knight e6 check. The rook, of course, is pinned along this diagonal, and my knight could take his queen. But it's worse than that because, well, it's not worse than that actually. It's his best move here is to play king to f7, and then I play knight takes, and white is quickly winning in this position. This after he takes one of my knights, either one, say this one, I can gang up on his pinned rook, and there's going to be a very quick checkmate here. Starting to run a little longer than I intended, so I won't go through every single one of these lines, but you can believe me, there's a checkmate in that position. So instead, what he did was, after knight f6, he went ahead and took my knight, but that doesn't really help the central problem, because then I just take the rook check. I mean, it kept me from winning the queen, but now I win the king. He goes to h7, and I check on f7, and at this point, Mike resigned, because after bishop to g7, the queen mates on g7. So it was a fun game, a lot more fun than getting beat by Paul last week, I'll have to admit. But that's the way chess is. It's the enjoyment of the game is almost always dependent on the outcome of the game. So that was it. It was really the key problem here was this bishop going to a square where the knight could where the bishop could take on f7, knight could check, and you could take here on g4. This line comes up. I've played something similar to this several times in a Smith-Morra gambit as white as well. So if you play this Sicilian against me and you get into a Smith-Morra, make sure you don't do that. Don't put your bishop there where I can win it from you. Okay, so this is Roger Capello signing off. I'll see you next week in episode 44. I guess it will be well, not next. It's 2 weeks because we have don't have any game Thanksgiving holiday Wednesday night before Thanksgiving, but then the week after we'll have first round of the next tournament. So long.